organization development cycle is composed of 4 phases, namely, entering and contracting, diagnosing, planning and implementing change, lastly, evaluating and institutionalizing change. This chapter covers the first 2 phases, beginning with the discussion of their importance, objectives, and outcomes. It then presents in detail the models and local frameworks for diagnosis used by OD practitioners. This chapter also enumerates the different methods for undertaking diagnosis, describes ways to analyze quantitative and qualitative data, as well as identifies the factors that may influence the diagnosis process. The chapter also provides key points for communicating the results of the diagnosis, and then ends by describing a real case of organization diagnosis conducted by a local company. And now let's proceed to entry and contracting, which involves the initial contact with the client, determining the preliminary scope of the OD initiative and establishing the parameters of the OD project.
Entry. Entering into an OD relationship begins when a client organization has an issue or problem that it wants to resolve through an OD process. The client then seeks an OD practitioner, either internal or external, that it can work with, and an initial contact, called the entry stage. OD practitioner gathers information about the organization and presenting problem. Internal OD practitioner, by virtue of being part of the organization, may need to veer away from their role as mere support to the OD process and increase their credibility as an objective consultant. External consultants. According to Chung Judge and Holbake 2015, the main challenge is to determine the key people that they need to work with within the organization, gain acceptance, and secure commitment from the different groups and units vital to the implementation of the OD initiative. Contracting. Contracting begins when the organization decides to engage or assign an OD practitioner or a consultant to begin the OD process. Contracting is an iterative process. The agreement or contract typically describes the following: the objective and scope of OD initiative, intervention design, method, and project activities, project timetable, roles and responsibilities of each party in the project, ground rules for working together, resources requirements. Organization diagnosis. Organization diagnosis is a collaborative process wherein the client organization and the OD practitioner work together.
Theories underlying organization diagnosis. The development of organization diagnosis models is heavily influenced both by Kurt Lewin's The Change Theories and Action Research Model, as well as Carl Ludwig von Beer-Tallenfie's General System Theory. Kurt Lewins believed that social conflicts can be addressed by, first, analyzing and understanding how social groups are formed, motivated, and maintained, and second, by changing the behavior of the social groups. He posits that the nature and characteristics of a group and the environment on field in which the groups operate influence the behavior of individuals. But let us first define what is group dynamics, field theory, and action research. Group dynamics seeks to identify the specific characteristics or qualities of a particular group that causes it to behave or react in a certain way to environmental stimuli, while field theory aims to understand group behavior by mapping out the totality and complexity of the field in which the behavior takes place. On the other hand, action research is a process that begins with the identification of a problem area, followed by the development of a hypothesis and the collection of empirical data to test the hypothesis. Bertalanffy's system theory is a system theory provides the conceptual foundation upon which many diagnosis frameworks were developed. The theory is rooted on the interrelatedness and interdependence of all phenomena, either physical, biological, psychological, social, and cultural. Von Bertalanffy introduced the concepts of closed systems and open systems. According to him, open systems are in a constant state of interaction with the environment, while closed systems are that exist in isolation. Complexity theory is the study of complex, nonlinear, dynamic systems. The internal and external boundaries of complex systems are highly permeable and dynamics, and their internal behavior and processes highly variable. Culture is another aspect to be considered in the practice of OD. OD practitioners need to be mindful of the different levels of culture as well as subcultures, national, organizational, and individual, the way they relate to each other and how these relationships affect the success of interventions. Levels of diagnosis. Cummings and Worley 2009 identified 3 levels of diagnosis. 1. Organizational. The diagnosis focuses on how external factors affect the organization's key processes. These factors can be specific to the organization's business, such as sudden change in customer preferences, shortage of suppliers, presence of aggressive competitors, or the launch of new products in the market. 2. Groups. Diagnoses focuses on how these design components affect the group design components. These include such as goal clarity, task structure, team functioning, group composition, group norms, productivity, and others. 3. Individuals. In this level include task identity, skill variety, autonomy, task significance, and feedback. The output of this level would be individual effectiveness, job satisfaction, and personal development, among others.
Approaches in conducting diagnosis. Let's first differentiate diagnostic approach and dialogic approach. Diagnostic approach looks for problems that need solutions, while the dialogic approach focuses on opportunities for growth. Here are the diagnostic tools and models developed in the West. In the 1950s, OD interventions were implemented by Douglas McGregor at Union Carbide, Herbert Shepard, and Robert Blake at Esso Oil, as well as by Douglas McGregor and Richard Beckhardt at General Mills Cummings and Worley 2009. The success of those interventions in the West resulted in dynamic OD practice and theory building, including the development of a wide range of diagnostic tools capture organizational elements such as strategy, leadership, work processes, share their experience, and bring to the surface issues and challenges they encounter at work pertaining to these elements. Diagnostic tools. Number 1. SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In this tool, data about an organization's internal strengths and weaknesses, including the opportunities and threats present in its external environment, are gathered from key stakeholders, afterwards used for strategic planning purposes. Diagnostic tool number 2, the problem tree analysis. This mapping tool uses part of a tree to illustrate the relationship between organizational problems and their causes as well as consequences. The trunk of the tree represents the problem identified by the organization, the branches symbolize the consequences of the problem, and the roots represent the cause of the problem. Diagnostic tool number 4, fishbone diagram. This fishbone diagram uses the image of a fishbone to categorize the sources of common organizational problems. These problem sources are material, methods or processes, manpower or people, machines, equipment, and measurements. In recent years, environment has been added as another problem source. Similar to the problem tree analysis, lines are drawn from each fishbone to determine the problem's root causes.
Diagnostic models. In the 1970s, Weisbord 1976 and Waterman 1978 conceptualized the 6-box model and the McKinsey 7 seconds model, respectively. Cumming and Worley 2009. 6-box model illustrates how 6 important aspects of the organization: purpose, structure, rewards, helpful mechanisms, and relationships are connected to each other. It argues that the larger the gap between the formal and informal systems within each other variable, the less effective the organization becomes, while McKinsey's 7 is model for assessing organization strategy, structure, systems, style of leadership, shared values, staff, and skills. It emphasizes that the 7 elements should be aligned with one another. Third, The Nadler-Tushman congruence model. It identifies four critical factors that drive an organization's performance. These are task, people, formal organization comprised of formal structure, systems, and processes, and the informal organizational arrangements, also referred to as culture. It assumes open systems theory, formal and informal systems, including the fit or congruence between the internal variables. Stream analysis for us. Organizing arrangements, social factors, technology, physical settings. It examines the interconnections among these variables and identifying core problems. Burke-Litwin model. This model considers the external environment, mission and strategy, leadership and organizational culture as the primary levers for major organizational change or transformational change. Organizational System Model OSM David Hanna. It suggests that harmonizing and aligning operational variables are critical to organizational performance. These variables are stakeholder needs, strategy and capabilities, organizational systems, culture, results, underlying values and beliefs. Friedman's SWAMP model of socio-technical systems. It advocates alignment of inputs, work processes and outputs, highlights the importance of feedback. Comprehensive model for diagnosing organization. Simmons and Worley is one of the more recent diagnosis frameworks. This model's distinguishing factor is its representation of the three levels of diagnosis: organization, group, and individual. This model advocates alignment of inputs, design components, and outputs, alignment of one level with the other levels.
Locally developed diagnostic models. The Blondin OD process model. Dr. Jack Willany, Blondin, founder of the Southeast Asia Interdisciplinary Development Institute SADI, developed an OD process model that was used by TACO 1988 in the organization Development A. The model consists of three phases. 1. Diagnose. 2. Develop. 3. Evaluate. The objective of the first phase is to define the reality of the system. There are two stages in the implementation of this phase. Stage 1 consists of defining the system. Stage 2 consists of identifying the problem. Framework for defining the strategic roles and directions of Philippine development NGOs. This framework illustrates the use of both the action research model and systems theory. The model involves a three-step process. 1. First step is defining and understanding the collective history of NGOs, their collective values, vision and strategies, and the external and internal environment. 2. The second step is using these factors as inputs and assessing the effectiveness of the organization's processes. 3. The third and final step is evaluating the performance and impact of the organization using specific indicators. Allegri, 1996. Part of Organization Assessment. The assessment provides an organization's snapshot of the institution's change agenda and goals, and the impact of its external and internal environment on its current and future operations. Dialogic approach, models and methods. Another approach to conducting organization diagnosis is the dialogic approach. Dialogic approach is built upon the following precepts of social constructionism. 1. Meaning is created in and through social interaction. 2. Values and ideologies are formed through social agreements. 3. Organizations are formed, sustained and transformed by discourse. And 4. Knowledge is constructed as people engage in social negotiation, shared discourse, and the creation of social structures. Bush and Marshak, 2015. The most frequently used dialogic models include 1. Appreciative inquiry. AI involves having conversations about the organization's positive core. 2. World Cafe, designed on the assumption that people have the wisdom and creativity to address challenges. 3. Open space technology. Participants are invited to nominate topics that they want to discuss with others. 4. Search conference. SC is used for planning activities. SC participants normally are asked to analyze an organization's external environment and how this affected the organization and its past and current internal system and its most desirable future. The diagnostic process. The diagnostic process proceeds from the identification of the problem, the collection of data, analysis, and interpretation of the data, and communication of the results to the client organizations. Data should be collected from the three sources that would be affected by the change process, namely, decision makers, focal group, internal and external groups. OD practitioner in the Philippines can use the following methods in collecting data. Data collection methods. 1. Survey. This is used to obtain data from a sample of a population. It intends to generalize results from a sample to a quantitative and provides a quantitative or numeric description of trends, attitudes, or opinions. 2. Interview. It holds one-on-one discussion with the respondent. It's either face-to-face, via phone, or by email who share information. 3. Observation. It obtains data on the behavior and activities of individuals. 4. Focus group discussion FGG, which facilitates a group discussion with 5-12 key respondents. The purpose is to obtain data from several respondents at one time. 5. Existing documents or records. It obtains data from photographs, videotapes, computer messages, sounds, and film, as well as analyze documents from the organization. Aside from the method presented earlier, there is also indigenous methods of data collection. Psikologiyang Pilipino. The psychology born out of Filipino culture and language has highlighted the necessity of developing theoretical frameworks and methodologies that capture the Filipino identity more accurately than Western frameworks and methods. Pepo and Protasio Marcellino, 2007. The indigenous data gathering methods includes 1. Pagtatanong, informal interview. 2. Pakikipagkwentuhan, storytelling or informal conversation. 3. Pagdala, visitation. 4. Pakikipanalian, residing in the research settings. 5. Pagmamasid, observation. Data analysis and interpretation. Depending on the research methodology used, the resulting data can be either quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative data is analyzed through descriptive statistics, frequencies and means, and complex statistical tests such as correlation and regression, especially if the number of responses meets the required sample size. Qualitative data, on the other hand, are typically analyzed by clustering responses into themes. Ideally, the themes corresponding to the organizational variables or elements of the model were chosen by the OD practitioners as a framework for conducting the design. In some instances, such as in surveys, a mixed methodology may be employed. For example, survey feedback can be conducted to validate the quantitative, validating the results with others, with the members of the diagnosis team, with key organizational stakeholders, is ideal as the diamond should be able the causes as opposed to the symptoms of organizational issues. Communicating diagnosis results. This is an important step in the diagnosis process, as Newland 2006 noted. Feedback at its best creates energy and change. Giving feedback on the results creates a heightened awareness of the issues confronting the client system, establishes a space for the client system to validate or buy into the information presented. Cummings and Worley 2008 proposed that the content of the feedback data should be. Giving feedback in the local context, however, may have certain nuances. Filipinos become more open to negative feedback if positive feedback is given prior to and after the presentation of the negative feedback. This so-called sandwich approach, giving negative feedback in between giving feedback on positive aspects, emphasizes areas for improvement rather than weaknesses. After the presentation of the diagnosis results, the OD practitioner ideally helps the client plan its interventions. The succeeding chapters will describe some of these interventions. Ethics in the diagnosis process. As discussed in the previous chapter, context and national culture may influence the practice of OD. Similarly, a number of factors can affect the diagnosis process. This includes 1. The political landscape in the organization. The OD practitioner has to be aware of the different groups within the organization and their dynamics. Chung Judge and Holbicki 2015. Since diagnosis is a stimulation in itself and a process in which organization members are stimulated to reflect on their issues, the practitioner should be able to sense if the individual or groups in the organization are open to the process. 2. Misrepresentation and collision. Presenting a partial picture, Adopting the client's bias. Jameson and Gellerman 2006. Manipulation and coercion or using threats and rewards are inappropriate way to engage organization members to participate in the diagnosis. 3. Diversity can also be a factor in the diagnostic process. For example, interview and survey questions may need to be translated to suit specific groups in the organization. 4. Misusing the data. Practitioners should also be mindful of this. It includes sharing confidential information or presenting incomplete data to support a conclusion. Jameson and Gellerman 2006.